Yeah. No. Okay, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I think we're ready to go here. I think we're loaded. I know one guy that's loaded right now, and that would be this one. He is loaded with mischief this afternoon. He's been in his crate while we were at service, so he has places to go and people to see. He's a mess. He's a mess. So I hope you guys have had a good Shabbat so far. And I know we have. It's been a beautiful day here. It's just perfect weather. It's warm, but not too warm. There's a nice breeze blowing. The sun is shining. There are no bad Shabbats, no matter what. But anyway, it's been a good one. And so what I'd like to do today is to continue, and basically we're going to call it part B, but we're really just kind of finishing up from last week's lesson on the upper room experience. And because the passage I want to go through today has so much packed in there, I thought last week I better just save that one, or we'll be here 2 hours. And so we saved this last scripture reference that really shows us the pattern for the upper room. And that passage is going to be found in the book of Acts. So let me give you the reference here. It's Acts chapter 20, and we're going to be looking at verses 7 through 12. And then I'm going to share some phrases or words with you from this little account in the book of Acts. And what I want to point out to you is not just basically a summary of the principles we've looked at with the upper room and the resurrection and so forth, and this principle of hospitality that is so much a part of the kingdom that Yeshua was teaching his disciples, because it really did. It stretched all the way back to the beginning, to the garden, and it stretches forward to the garden. That's what's really important to us, is it's something to make us look forward in terms of our preparation. Because, and I don't know if it's generational, I don't know if it has to do more with people being more mobile in this generation. People they don't stay around the homestead where they were brought up as much anymore. And I think with kind of that breakdown of the family homestead, the family link, the family hometown, and so forth, I think what kind of dispersed with that was the hospitality that was very customary 2 generations ago. And, they call it Southern hospitality, but that sort of hospitality, I think, was everywhere. And then as the family unit broke down, it seemed as though there was less hospitality available. We know people, they work a lot longer hours, and sometimes you don't have that extended family unit that's available, to help with childcare and so forth. And so a lot of it is just people really are getting choked out with the cares of the world, and they don't really spend or have, I don't know which way to put it, that would depend on the individual. They don't really have the time to invest in hospitality to other believers, especially. Not that we're leaving out the poor, the needy, the widow, and so forth. That's very much a part of this template. But within the template is the understanding that these are either righteous people are already, or they're people on the road to righteousness. And so we don't extend as much hospitality, I think, because the family unit is more fragmented. And it seems as if, too, that like that old-fashioned welcoming the visiting preacher sort of thing. Yeah, and some of you are like, what are you talking about? I never heard of that. Well, you probably haven't. Again, it's going to stretch back 2 or 3 generations, but back in the day, it was quite an honor if there was a visiting minister to host that minister for a meal. It was a huge honor. It was a huge deal, just like it is in the scriptures. And today, not so much. People are like, it's like, did I draw the short straw? Am I going to have to host this person? We've got a different mindset today, and it doesn't mean it's the right one. It means it's the one we have, but it's also one that can be changed and become more biblically aligned to where we see it as an honor to host a minister, to host righteous believers. And so that's been the beauty of looking at this template all the way from Genesis to Revelation. And so I want to pick up again with a new covenant example. And I want you to see how deeply embedded prophecy is within hospitality. Like if we didn't get it up to this point, maybe we're not going to get it, but let's try one more time. Let's try right here in Acts chapter 20 and starting with verse 7. It says, on the first day of the week, when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul began talking to them, intending to leave the next day. And he prolonged his message until midnight. There were many lamps in the upper room where we were gathered together. And there was a young man named Eutychus. I'm going to call him Eutychus. He sounds like a Ute because he's a young man. So he was a Ute. A young man named Eutychus sitting on the windowsill, sinking into a deep sleep. And as Paul kept on talking, he was overcome by sleep and fell down from the 3rd floor and was picked up dead. But Paul went down and fell upon him, and after embracing him, he said, do not be troubled, for his life is in him. When he had gone back up and had broken the bread and eaten, he talked with them a long while until daybreak, and then he left. They took away the boy alive and were greatly comforted. Right, on its surface, that's a great little story. Maybe the moral of the story at a simple level is if you're going to fall asleep during a teaching, then try not to do it on a windowsill on the 3rd story. At least fall asleep in the meeting, which I think there's some better things to find right here. And so I'm going to, for those of you who can see me, not everybody can because of the podcast, but what I'd like is to show you these phrases and words that I've picked out so you can get a visual, because these are prophetic phrases and words. And if you've studied with us for maybe several years, over time, you've probably picked up every one of these and put it into your prophecy toolkit. As you're trying to understand prophecy, and remember, Torah is the great prophecy. The Torah is the prophecy, and the prophets are his legs. The prophets explain the great prophecy of the Torah. So as we've explained some of these terms or put them in context, explain the significance of them, you've had the opportunity over the years to keep track of them and say, you know what, when I see that phrase or when I see that word somewhere else in scripture, then I'll recognize it. And I'll know how to piece together the significance of that phrase or of that word. So the first day of the week, that's an important phrase, the first day of the week, because we know the first day of the week is Sunday. But we also know that the first day of the week begins Saturday evening. So after Shabbat goes out with sundown on Saturday, on the 7th day, that's when the first day of the week begins, even though the sunrise part of that day will not occur, of course, until sunrise. So the first day of the week, right? And we have some context again for prophetic things happening on the first day of the week, such as Yeshua, them noticing that he was resurrected on the first day of the week. It says, when we were gathered together to break bread, when we were gathered together to break bread, right? So the gathering has to do with the kahila, the assembly, and it's assembling together to break bread, right? It's a meeting, and they're going to be sharing hospitality, right? Midnight, that's an important prophetic term for you to know, because, well, I'll explain it a little bit later if you don't already have that in your toolkit, but go ahead and write that one down. Midnight is important. It says there were many lamps. Lamps are important. The Torah is a light, the commandment is a lamp, but we also know where many lamps were located in the Mishkan and also in the Mikdash, the tabernacle and the temple. The upper room where we were gathered. All right, so after our lessons here on hospitality, we really get the upper room. We understand that the upper room has something to do with resurrection. And then it mentions a young man named Eutychus. Young man in scripture, that's a prophecy marker. If you see the term young man, young woman, young men, women, something prophetic is happening, right? So that should be a big clue right there. When there was a young man, okay, something, there's something in prophecy I should understand from this story. And it says he was sitting on the windowsill. A window can be an important prophetic marker. So put down window. Deep sleep. Sleep has significance to it, and it can mean more than one thing. It can mean literal sleep, but it has some other meanings too. So a deep sleep, this is not just a sleep, this is a deep sleep. Okay. And then it says he fell down. Falling down has a prophetic meaning. Adam and Eve basically fell out of the garden when we are fallen. Remember, Babylon the Great has fallen. There is a movement from one realm to the next, and you're going down a level. And it says from the third floor. We know 3 is the number of resurrection. And then last week I explained, I showed you some pictures of how a Israelite house 3,000 years ago would have looked. And it wasn't much different in the first century, that a second story was customary, but a third floor was definitely on the level of prophecy, because that's what Elijah and Elisha would have had. They would have had an upper room, which was on a third floor. And we both know that both of those men are associated with the resurrection. And not only does this youth fall down, it says he was picked up dead. So again, that makes us think of Adam and Eve, basically the fall from the garden, and then what was happening, picked up dead. So there's a death associated with falling down from the third floor. When he had gone back up, talking about Pa, and had broken bread and eaten. Right? So there's some sort of ceremonial meal that is going on, and it's associated probably with the conclusion of Shabbat, a special meal. And Paul does go down. He does some things down here with the young man, and then he just turns around and goes right back up and continues on with the meal like nothing has happened. And so when he goes back up, I want you to think again in terms of realms. When somebody falls down from a realm, what happened? They die. But when they go back up into a realm, what's going on? And he's going back up into this third floor. He's going back into this upper room. It says he talked with them a long while until daybreak. Daybreak is an important prophetic marker. And if you're thinking like, okay, that sounds familiar, it is familiar to you because when we were doing the study on, I think the title of it is How Far Gone is the Night? And it had to do with the night watchman and the footsteps of Messiah and hearing the footsteps of Messiah in the dark and how they would ask, watchman, how far gone is the night? It is the night watchmen who are awake and who are awaiting the return of Messiah, because it's thought that daybreak is the time of Messiah. He's, called the morning star. Daybreak is an important time, and it is associated with the return of Messiah. And so then they say they took the boy alive, took away the boy alive, and were greatly comforted. Right? So there's a resurrection that's associated with the daybreak, and the people are comforted by this resurrection. Right? And that's what I want to point out is that the chronology here is a little odd. It seems like they should have been greatly comforted when Paul says, oh, don't worry about it, his life's still in him. But it doesn't say that then. It's really weird. The story, it doesn't include that until the very end. Right? So let's go back and let's look at the passage again. And this time pay attention to the chronology. So on the first day of the week, when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul began talking to them, intending to leave the next day. When would he be leaving? He would be leaving Sunday morning, first day morning. And he prolonged his message until midnight. Midnight is a perilous time. There were many lamps in the upper room where we were gathered together. And there was a young man named Eutychus sitting on the windowsill, sinking into a deep sleep. And as Paul kept on talking, he was overcome by sleep and fell down from the third floor and was picked up dead. So he falls into a deep sleep. And then it says he was overcome by it. He's sleeping so hard, he's overcome by the sleep and falls down from the third floor. And when they pick him up, he's dead. He has fallen down to the lowest realm. As we were looking at last week's lesson, we talked about the ground floor being the level of the animals. And so Paul doesn't seem too disturbed. It says, Paul went down and fell upon him. And after embracing him, he said, do not be troubled, for his life is in him. Well, it doesn't tell us at this point that the boy is alive. That's what's interesting. We have to keep reading to find out what happened. All we hear at this point is Paul says, don't be troubled, his life is in him. But we don't have any evidence yet. So it says, when he had gone back up and had broken bread and eaten. In other words, Paul just goes back up, goes back to the meal, talks to them for a long time until daybreak. And then he left. Right? Now, it says, they took away the boy alive and were greatly comforted. Does that not sound strange? Like, shouldn't that detail be farther up in the story? After Paul, it says, fell upon him and embraced him. Don't be troubled, his life is in him. Well, if Paul says, don't be troubled, his life is in him, it's because he still looks like he's dead. And then, instead of saying, ta-da, he's resurrected, they took the boy away alive, they were greatly comforted, it doesn't say that. Not until the end. It says he went back up and he finished his meal and he talked with them a long time until daybreak and then left at daybreak. And then it says they took the boy alive and were greatly comforted. That's just an odd sequence of events. It seems like the boy coming alive should occur after Paul embraces him. It should occur after Paul says, don't be troubled, his life is in him. But that's not where we see it. it seems like the comforting part should be back up here, like Paul embraces him, he comes back to life, and then everybody's comforted. And then it seems like he would go back up, finish his meal, talk to them until daybreak, and then leave and set out on his journey. The sequence of events here is just a little odd to me. So I did want you to see that part so you could see why it's going to take us a minute. This is a little more involved than the story of Dorcas being resurrected in the upper room. So we want to pick up on these clues. These phrases, they're not random. They have significance to them. And so when Paul does this, when he just like, oh, he's fine. And he goes back up, finishes the meal, finishes the teaching, sun's up, he trots off. And only then do we find out the boy is alive. Only then do we find out that people are relieved that he's alive. So we have to go back and pick up on these threads that we have of upper room resurrection. Now, to me, the most obvious one is going to be like Yeshua. They notice he's resurrected when it's dawning toward, it says the first day of the week. Well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless you understand the way that the Hebrew day is reckoned. It begins at sundown. And so when Shabbat goes out, it goes out at sundown on Saturday. But now it's already the first day of the week, even though it's dark. And that's based on evening and morning, the first day, evening and morning, the second day, and so forth. So you begin the reckoning of the day at sundown, unless it specifically, your context tells you that it has something to do with the sunrise, like that's when that day dawns. There's two ways of reckoning, but in terms of the first day of the week and so forth, the first day is technically going to start at sundown on Saturday. It's called Motzei Shabbat, or the going out of the Shabbat. And so what are they doing? They're gathering together. The believers are gathering together to hear Paul teach and speak, and they're sharing a common meal at that time. And it's at this dawning toward the first day of the week, which would be the next morning, the time when Paul left. That's when we know that they noticed Yeshua was resurrected, as it dawned toward the first day of the week. So there's a gathering together at the conclusion of Shabbat, the same way that all the disciples were gathered together. And then when the women went out and they realized that morning that Yeshua had been resurrected, they know where the disciples are, and they run back to that gathering to break the news to them. And of course, they're disbelieving and they have to go check for themselves. But there's something that happens about midnight, and we have studied that as a prophetic term before. And it goes back to how far gone is the night. If you're wanting to go back and review those lessons, they'll be in the playlist. But midnight or about midnight is when bad things can happen, at least in Scripture. It's a very perilous time. In fact, if you do the traditional Passover Seder, as you get to the end of the Haggadah, together you will recite this passage, this like a poem, like a song, that recounts all the things that happened about midnight. How it looked really bad and then there was deliverance. It looked really bad and there was deliverance. So it was bad for the enemy, but it was good for us. And so about midnight, something that looks very bad happens. This young man falls out of the windowsill from the third story. It is a perilous time, and he fell asleep. And so he went from a deep sleep to a dead sleep. And we see that it occurs in an upper room. And we're told there's many lamps. So let's think of one of the other upper room experiences we've studied, the Shunammite woman. When she prepared that upper room for Elisha, remember, it specifically mentioned that she put a lamp in there, a bed, a lamp, a table. She makes sure that there's a lamp in there in this upper room. And so in this upper room where the young man is, it says there were many lamps. Which that's kind of a play on words too, because we know there were 7 lamps on the menorah of the tabernacle. And there were actually multiple menorot in the temple itself. But back in the day and time in which this was written, the book of Acts was written, a great person would be called a lamp. A great person would be called a lamp. And so even as you're reading, they derive this even from the writings of the church fathers. When a well-known apostle would die, they would say a great lamp has fallen asleep. Or if in one case, a generation of apostles had finally passed away, and the writer says great lamps have fallen asleep. And so when it says there's many lamps in this upper room, it tells you that there's many believers in this upper room. It tells you that these believers are full of the Spirit in this upper room. It's a menorah. And of course, the number 3 represents resurrection. They're on the 3rd floor. And Paul is enjoying the hospitality of the saints, and they're enjoying it with one another. That's oneg. That's the delight. And so not only do we have oneg during Shabbat, it looks like the custom of believers in Yeshua, at least in the days not long after Yeshua's ascension, their custom was to gather together at this time. It's a time called Havdalah. Havdalah. And there's a small ceremony, and you have a cup of wine, you have a lamp, you have a candle, and you have spices, and you make a blessing. And this little blessing acknowledges that the holiness of Shabbat, you're marking the end of that, and you're ushering in the new day. You're ushering in the first day of the week. And in fact, the song that you typically sing at Havdalah is Eliyahu Hanavi, which is Elijah the prophet. And Elijah the prophet is the one associated probably most with the resurrection. And so it looks like they've met together at Havdalah, and they're bringing food to share, and they're sharing the word. I'm sure that what they needed to do at this point, they went to synagogue still. And so they're hearing the Torah read in the synagogue. And I wonder if they're not going right back there on Saturday evenings at Havdalah, discussing what they heard in the Torah portion or in the Haftorah portion, and saying, let's talk about Yeshua in light of this. We're seeing Yeshua. All right, especially now that he has resurrected and ascended, I'm sure they had a ton to talk about, because they don't seem to be bothered at all talking all night. They talk till daybreak. And of course, daybreak does represent a time of resurrection. That's something, if you don't know it, you should write it down somewhere and just remember that. Have that in your toolkit. And so it's only at the very end that it says they took the boy away alive and were greatly comforted. These are interesting stories. That 3rd story is like a resting place. Remember, it was a resting place for Eliyahu, for Elijah. It was a resting place for Elisha. It was the place, remember last week when we talked about Dorcas, Peter resurrecting Dorcas in her upper room, and how she had assembled all those garments in that upper room, probably giving them away to the other believers, making that provision for them, doing that hospitality for them. And so even down to the garments, when we look at an upper room and the furniture of the upper room mirroring what's in the tabernacle, and at least for Dorcas, there was the garments as well. There were priestly garments that had to be worn. There were Levitical garments that had to be worn in the holy place. And so this upper room is picturing for us a holier place. Because not only is the upper room this sanctuary for the prophets, for the ministers of the kingdom, it is a place of resurrection. It's representing the third floor. It's representing the Garden of Eden, even up to, remember, the Shunammite woman, she also put a wash basin, the washing of the feet, being able also to wash your hands. It goes back to that picture of the tabernacle, the priests. So these upper room stories are going to have the furniture and the garments. When you assemble them together, they're going to have pictures, not just of hospitality, but pictures of the tabernacle itself. Because the lamps, remember it says there were many lamps in this upper room. In the tabernacle and in the temple, you had a table of the bread of faces, or showbread is how it's translated. And so the menorah, the lamp, would cast light onto the table of showbread, onto the bread of faces. And so what's going on in this upper room where Paul is talking? Well, they're breaking bread. That's what the lamp illuminated, the bread of faces. And of course, we know the 12 loaves represented the 12 tribes. There's many lamps in this upper room, and they're being illuminated. Not only are they illuminating, they are being illuminated in this upper room. It's a tabernacle picture. So when you assemble all these upper room stories together, you can see, yeah, it's way more than just simple hospitality that these early believers are doing for one another. It's taking them all the way back to the Torah. It's taking them all the way back to the Garden of Eden. Because remember, there was a resting place for the presence of Adonai. His voice, he would descend into the third heaven, and he would walk and talk with the human beings. And so even when they built the Mishkan, they built it, remember the mercy seat, the chair, the resting place between two cherubim. And the voice of Adonai would speak between the two cherubim. So you could hear the voice there. It was a voice coming from the tabernacle, just like the voice coming from the garden. So it's picturing for us a miraculous place. And we think, oh, it was just an upper room, and a little kid fell asleep, fell down, and somehow Paul revived him. No, this is a prophetic story. It's here to encourage us. Miraculous things happen in the upper room, just as miraculous things happened in the Mishkan. Remember Aaron's rod that budded? I mean, a rod is a dry stick. It's dead. It's just dead. But when they had the question of leadership, of authority, what happens? Aaron's rod starts budding with almond blossoms, with flowers. That which is dry and dead can come back to life. And so this is what hospitality is all about. Things that were dry and dead can come back alive when we practice upper room hospitality, because we're making room for the presence of Adonai in our lives through his people. So that's what we want to do. We want to create a favorable, hospitable place for the presence of Elohim. And the way that he has provided for us to do that now is to provide that favorable, hospitable place for the tzaddikim, for the righteous, for the saints, however you want to call it. So these items, these times of day and so forth, the third story, all of these things in the story, they have significance. Now, you don't have to look for meaning, right? That's not what we look for. Meaning is fixed. It never changes. But significance, that's what we want to look at. People tend to get into fights over scripture because they fight over the meaning, when actually what they've both found is significance. And it's okay if somebody sees a significance to a passage that you don't see yet. No need to get into an argument over it. It's okay if somebody sees some significance that you don't yet see. You don't even have to validate that for them. So, so many times you're like, is this what you see? Is this what you see? Well, they may not see it. It doesn't mean you're wrong. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It doesn't mean you're, teaching false doctrine. It just means you saw it has a significance to you. It doesn't have to this other person yet. So we have to be very careful with meaning, which does not change. And it can be very damaging if you start trying to change the meaning of the text. But significance, it's important to contemplate that. So we know the significance of the first day of the week, that it is a time of resurrection. We know the significance of gathering to break bread. We know the significance of midnight. We know the significance of lamps. We know now the significance of the upper room. We know the significance even of gathering. What about the significance of the window? That might be something else we can look at. He fell asleep on a windowsill. So what's the significance of the window? What's the significance of deep sleep? We know the significance of it being on the third floor. We learned that last week. How come Paul just goes back up and goes back to breaking bread and eating and teaching? Going back up. See, he's up, and then there's a descent, and then he goes back up, and then he goes back down. What's going on here? Why is he going up and down, up and down? There's significance there. And I think it's all designed to comfort us. So let's go back to the garden. That was one that we didn't really address. But it'll help us to think about the window without getting like new agey or something. A window in scripture is a portal. It can release things into another realm. It can allow you to pass between realms. It's kind of like a door, similar to a door in that respect. It talks about the windows of heaven being opened. In other words, you can open or close a flow of blessing. You can pass from one realm to the other, because clearly he fell out of the upper story down to the first story, down to the earth. So that's going to help us understand that this is a story, and it's not as in a fiction story, but like a real story. This is a story about our own journey between realms, of understanding what it means to be on the ground floor with the animals, a fallen world. What does it mean to be in an upper room? And so it's like with this resurrection significance, it's showing us with this window thing, like, yes, we're all going to fall asleep eventually. Unless Yeshua returns, we will all fall into a deep sleep, not just a sleep. There is a sleep can represent spiritual apathy. But eventually everybody falls asleep. Everybody dies. You say, none of us are getting out if you're alive. unless Yeshua comes first. And so that deep sleep can represent falling down into a place where the body will decay, right? As we think about being with Yeshua, and preparing ourselves to administrate, to rule with King Yeshua from the Garden of Eden, because we know his kingdom is coming. We know that he will be sending us out with missions, with things to do. And so as we look at the pattern here, let's think what it is. Let's just like, okay, we've got 3 stories. There's an upper room we're focusing on this week. Obviously, there's a ground floor that's not a good picture because this boy, even though he is young, he falls down to the level of the animals, to the deadly part of the earth right now. It's not yet been restored. And so being a young man, there's a little bit of a hint there. If, like I said, you can go back and do a word search on young men or young women in scripture, and you will see that they are prophetic markers. And like Abraham took young men with him to take Isaac up to Mount Moriah to be sacrificed. We could see Abigail brings her young women. Esther has her young women. And the young men and the young women will be around when something prophetic is happening. But one reason, an additional significance to having the young men or the young women as a symbol is that it symbolizes what we will be at the resurrection. Like, for instance, what was his name? Naaman, the captain who had the case of leprosy. And so he's told, go dip 7 times in the Jordan. He doesn't want to go dip 7 times in the Jordan, but his servant finally convinces him to do it. Like, you're already here, just go ahead and dip and get it over with, you know? And so he does. And then it describes his skin. It's like a baby skin. And so the skin itself has somehow undergone a resurrection. And so, you know, that's one of the things the rabbis say about when somebody has crossed over into the garden, they're much harder to recognize. Even people who know them, they're a little more difficult to recognize, which makes sense because Yeshua's own disciples didn't recognize him at first. He walked with them on the road to Emmaus, and it wasn't until he broke bread, sound familiar? Until he broke bread that they recognized that's him, that's Yeshua. And so this young man, young woman, significance hints to that at the resurrection, of course, we're not going to have this wrinkled old body we have now. We will have the appearance of a young man or a young woman, that everything will be renewed. And so this boy falls down, and so he's been in the third heaven. What's going on up there in that upper room? Well, this is a place where today we would say these are people who are saved. They have accepted salvation in Yeshua. That's why they're gathering together at this particular time to break bread. They have something in common. They have accepted salvation in Yeshua. That's the reason they're gathering. But even though they're saved, when the boy falls out of the window, he dies. Even though we are saved right now, when we fall out of this window, we will die. And then we will have to await the resurrection of the dead. But the good news, and we have Yeshua explaining this to us, is you still have a consciousness after you're dead. Whether you're a righteous person or a wicked person, you still have a consciousness. And so Paul says the boy's life is still in him. Don't worry. He's not as dead as you think he is. And that's the thing, for when we're dead, we're not as dead as we think we are. The soul still has consciousness. It doesn't have a body to do anything about it, but it has a consciousness. The difference is, Yeshua talks about the rich man and Lazarus, that it's for the rich man, he has appetite, emotion, desire, and intellect. He has all of these things. He just doesn't have a body to do anything about it. So like a drop of water on his tongue is not going to help at all. Lazarus, though, is cool. He's comforted. Father Abraham says he's comforted. Don't bother him. It's thought that you're given a white robe if you're righteous, and you just pretty much hang out in the garden until the resurrection of the dead. And that is like a spacesuit, this white garment that Revelation talks about. So you can just enjoy being where you are until you are resurrected as that young man or that young woman. And so there's a picture. We're saved, right, in Yeshua. We have that Passover scene in the upper room with Yeshua and the disciples. And then at some point, we're going to tumble out of there. We're going to die. And Yeshua would say, don't worry, the life's in them. They're going to be with me. Not as dead as they look, but to the natural world, they look very dead. But then what happens? Yeshua goes back up into the upper room. Paul goes into the upper room. What does Yeshua do? Yeshua goes up into the upper room. He ascends. And I think that's why in this chronology, it looks out of place. Where that doesn't say the boy is alive until the end, and it doesn't say the people are comforted till the end. That, yes, Yeshua ascended, but yet our salvation is safe with him. And so at the resurrection of the dead, even if we do die and are buried in the earth, the life is in us, and there will be comfort at his return. I think that's one pattern that we can see here. So again, thinking of Havdalah being the time that they're gathered together, they're breaking bread. I mean, just like in the tabernacle. And the tabernacle, remember, was patterned after the Garden of Eden. They're breaking bread. They're having this upper room experience. And that's why I say what you do on your second story. Last week when we were talking about what you do on your second story, how you prepare your upper room on the third story from the second story, how you conduct your daily life does matter. Because what you do in your daily life will determine whether you're building an upper room, preparing an upper room for the presence of Adonai in your house or not. And if you're preparing that upper room, don't worry. Don't worry. He's going to take care of everything. That's these Elisha, Eliyahu, resurrections in the upper room, Peter and Dorcas, Paul and this young man. The resurrection is taken care of. And I think that's why it's associated here with Havdalah. Havdalah being the time of acknowledging the going out of Shabbat and the dawning of a new week that we don't see yet because it's dark. It's like the day has started and it's dark. What's going on here? It seems like if we're saved, that we should instantly have this dawning, this resurrection. But we're going to have to go through an exile. The body is still in the dark. It's still in an exile. And so even though we're already saved and our resurrection is assured, it's here now, but not yet. That's what Havdalah acknowledges. It's a new day, but we have to light a candle because it's dark. We will finish this exile and then the day will dawn. And there will be a resurrection from the dead. And so Elijah, Eliyahu, Hanavi, he is associated with the resurrection. because he's one who did cross into another realm without having to physically die. And so when you do the Havdalah, you sing that song, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi. It's a reminder that the resurrection is coming. We are safe. Even though, like I said, at first, they're like, Paul says, don't worry about it. He's fine. And he goes back to the upper room. What did Yeshua tell us? You'll be fine. But I'm going back up to be with the Father right now. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. Just wait till the sun comes up. And then we'll go on a journey together. Even this day breaking, this dawning, think about Yeshua meeting the disciples. They've been out fishing all night, right? And there's no fish. They come up short. And then they look up, the sun's come up, and what's Yeshua doing? He's cooking breakfast on the beach at daybreak. So he's giving them this timestamp of resurrection. Sometimes it feels really dark. The times we live in can feel really dark. And I believe this is why it says, don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together. You need these upper room experiences each week. You need to meet with like-minded people each week to encourage you that even though it's still dark outside, a new day is already here. It's just that the light hasn't shined out yet. We need to get together and break bread together. Midnight is not a good time, typically, but about midnight. Is the death angel coming or not? Doesn't matter if you're in the house with Yeshua. It might be a time of death, but you're not dead. You are alive. And so for the righteous, there is deliverance. There is salvation. There is resurrection. And there's many lamps. You want to be one of those many lamps in the upper room. Because remember, those lamps can represent great believers, people of great faith. You can be like one of those 7 lamps of the menorah that is illuminating the bread of faces and being illuminated at the same time as part of the bread of faces. You say, well, which one is it? You have to learn to say yes on these symbols. Things can be this and this, because Yeshua even would use multiple parables to describe the same thing, because we're just kind of slow and thick. And so you say, well, am I a servant? Am I a bride? Am I a guest at the wedding? Yes. He's teaching you with all of those. It's important to see it from all those angles. It's our job to be one of those mini lamps in the upper room, gathered together according to the pattern. So the soul does continue to exist after death. No, you don't have the physical body attached to it. When something is separated out, it's dead. When spirit and soul and body are separate, you are considered dead. But it doesn't mean that there's not life in you. That's what Paul said about the boy. The life is in him. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine. Even if you have a loved one who has fallen asleep in Yeshua, don't worry about it. They're fine. The soul continues to exist. It's still functioning. And for the righteous, they actually have a way to function in the Garden of Eden, just like Lazarus did. There's comfort there. The wicked, not so much. Because not only do they not have a body, they still have the same appetites, emotions, and desires as if they did have the body. And so it's a thirst that can never be helped. It's a hunger that can never be helped. It's a heat that can never be helped. It's a worry, it's an anxiety that can never be comforted. It's a craving that can never be comforted. You know, he's even worried about his brothers. He knows what's going on with his family. He's like, send somebody to come warn my brothers. He's worried, but he doesn't, there's not a thing he can do about it. The time to do something about it is now. If you're worried about your family, warn them now. If you know you haven't drank enough of the word and his spirit, drink now. If you know you need more bread of the word, eat it now. Because once you fall asleep, you're pretty much there. And so you can either be with Yeshua and you can be comforted and satisfied, or you can be separated from him and your soul will still crave those things. But you're not going to enjoy a resurrection of your body where you can do something about it. This physical body is dying. And eventually, yes, we're all going to be picked up dead. Just like Adam and Eve. They fell out of the garden. They thought everything was okay, but as it turns out, it just took them hundreds of years to finish dying. But we want the embrace. Remember that's what we could see Elijah doing, like hugging the dead one. We want Yeshua to embrace us to life. Because there's his touch. You notice in the book of Acts that life could be even imparted to a physical object. You could transfer life and healing from one of the apostles to a sick person. Just like, remember when there was a dead guy thrown down and he hit Elisha's bones and he came back to life? And the apostles, they could touch a handkerchief or something with intention of healing, and they would take that cloth and take it to a sick person and they would be healed. It's like they could transfer the life into that object. Yeshua will transfer life into us. Paul knew the kid was not dead. He knew the kid was resurrected. And he was so confident of it, he goes right back up to the third floor. We need to have that same confidence in Yeshua that he will resurrect our children. That he is embracing us for salvation, that he is embracing us for resurrection, and that we will have entry to that third floor. And so I think that pretty much covers what I wanted to say. There's some interesting things with the boy's name that is really a cognate to the Hebrew name of Asher, because it means fortunate, to hit the mark, and well done. Eutychus, the Ute in question. Symbolic there. The young man fell asleep. What does his name mean? To hit the mark. Well done. What happens when you have hit the mark? That's what Torah is. It means to hit the mark, like with an arrow. And so with this kid, even though he fell asleep while everybody's fellowshipping, his name means hit the mark, well done. So when we do crossover, we want to be like this young man. We want to have spent our lives hitting the mark so that Yeshua says, well done, good and faithful servant. That's a fortunate son. That's a fortunate person who can hear, well done. You hit the mark. But yeah, it's a cognate to the Hebrew name Asher, which also means to be honest, to prosper, to be blessed, and to be happy. And so I think the blessing that was on this young man, it was a blessing of resurrection, but he is picturing for every one of us our state at the resurrection, that we will be happy. That our food, the blessing on Asher was his food shall be rich and he will yield royal dainties. Well, what are royal dainties? Well, rich food is a food that's full of oil. What was the bread of faces? It was the rich food. It was the royal dainties of the king. And just think, when we gather together and we break bread with one another at Oneg, at Havdalah, when we host somebody for a Rev Shabbat, what are we doing? We are like this young man. We're like the tribe of Asher. We are sharing the rich bread. We're sharing the illuminated bread. Because remember, the lamps also represented people, great people. And so you need to invite great people to share Shabbat meals with you. You need to meet with great people whose food is rich, and we share it with one another. What food were they eating? Just physical bread, or were they sharing the word of Adonai so that they could hit the mark and be blessed, be happy, be fortunate, to prosper? It's like when we gather together that we are sitting in the holy place itself. And that's why hospitality is important. That's why it is important to gather together and to break bread, to talk about the word. And trust me, it will yield royal dainties if we will do that. Okay, so I will stop here. And we do have some guests here today. Ed and Julie Burns are with us from Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. I started to say Broken Bow. There's both in Oklahoma. There's Broken Bow and Broken Arrow. I had to think twice. But they have been friends with, for a long time, and they have been park supervisors at Tamar in Israel, where we go hang out. And so we've had some adventures together. We've been recounting some of those adventures. And but it's good to see the faces, the bread of faces illuminated when we can share hospitality with one another. So I hope you had somebody to share hospitality with today. And if not, start making plans for next week. And we pray that blessing upon your home, that you would be privileged to open your home to a righteous guest, and that you would be invited as a righteous guest, and that those homes would enjoy the blessings that go with that. Those blessings of being inspired, given hope, that in spite of how dark it is outside, there is a resurrection coming. Don't worry. The life is in us. Don't believe the news. The news will lie to you. The news is wrong. Believe the good news, because the good news is, even though it's dark outside, life is in us because of Yeshua. All right. Love you guys, and B'ezrat Hashem, we'll see you back next week.